This week on the TT show, we talk about the downfall of Ubisoft, Sony's biggest budgetary failure yet, the new rumors about Nvidia's RTX 5090, the performance gains with the upcoming PS5 Pro, Intel's latest GPU being spotted in the wild, and how the current state of the PC industry isn't in favor of consumers. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the TT show. My name is Jak Connor. I'm a hardware editor over at Tweaktown, and today I'm joined by my co-host,
Kosta Andriadis, gaming hardware editor at Tweaktown.
Hello, my friend.
Hello. It's been a few days.
It has. We've settled back in from our trip over to, I don't even know if we can say the country.
Yeah, I mean, we were in China, we were in Hong Kong, and now we're back in Australia. Yeah, so we were there for, I mean, we can say it. We were there for for MSI. We got to see their factory, and we got to see what it takes to create the stuff that goes inside your PC.
Yes.
Oh, well, at a scale that is mind-boggling, when you can produce 1 million motherboards in 1 year.
Yeah.
Or whatever it was, or like a million GPUs, or that equates to like 30 tens of thousands a day.
Yeah, it is a lot. It was very impressive. Unfortunately, we can't get into any specific details about what we saw, or the process at all. Yep. Until a certain undisclosed date that we can say is quite soon. But whenever that information becomes publicly available, we will be filling you in. We have a lot of footage, we have a lot of photos. There's a lot of stuff that we got that we can show you guys. But until then, I'm sorry to leave you on the edge of your seat, but we are going to have to get straight back into the news, as we always do over here at the TT show. We are, I was about to say a certain word, but we are deep in the trenches here, and all I can smell is the downfall of Ubisoft.
Yeah, this is something that we were talking. I mean, obviously, as we're out and about globetrotting, all this sort of news pops up, and we had a few chats about this, but yeah, it's getting to the point with Ubisoft is that things are very dire. I mean, the big thing that gamers would know is that now the next Assassin's Creed is delayed to next year for, to make the game better. We don't want it to be unpolished, or we've learnt our mistakes. We don't want it to be like Star Wars Outlaws, which was a little buggy at launch, or not 100% polished. It was, it wasn't like a Sony game, or in terms of polish or something like that. So that seems normal, but then you've got the background thing of all the controversy in the company, and there is more to the story than just a game being delayed. Yeah.
We should, I suppose, give a rough history on it, and we are we were talking yesterday. We probably would end up doing a dedicated YouTube video of some kind on this topic, because there is a lot to flesh out. So we're not going to get into every single specific, but we'll just give a brief overview of what has happened at Ubisoft and pretty much where they're at right now that led up to the delay of Shadows. So I suppose I'll start with Star Wars Outlaws. It's recognized internally from Ubisoft through a leaked internal memo by Ubisoft CEO, that the game didn't, I don't want to get the quote because it is some very funny corporate jargon. Here's the quote: Star Wars Outlaws initial sales proved softer than expected. I do like that. Softer is nice.
That's that's like that corporate term. It's the sales have been soft. Instead of saying poor, or it is just like a mental thing, right? It's you choose the words that
make you feel better.
Don't make you feel better.
Well,
it's
he did a similar thing from when he chose the review scores for Star Wars Outlaws. He picked the one that made him feel better, which is very very funny. This whole
as they do.
This whole thing is, at least from my perspective, the internal memo leak gave an insight into how Ubisoft has viewed its products. And I think the public sentiment for quite some time is that Ubisoft has kind of turned into like the Marvel of game development, where they just roll out a new movie every year with the exact same formula. And it's just rinse and repeat.
Slightly different though. Slightly different because they have kind of been like missing in action since the pandemic. Like if you know, like before, like up to Assassin's Creed Valhalla, they were doing those sort of games every year, like a Far Cry every second year, Assassin's Creed every year. You know, like all their Tom Clancy stuff every second year. But since then, they've only released like there was that Assassin's Creed spin-off, that cool Prince of Persia game. There hasn't been a mainline Assassin's Creed. There hasn't been a mainline like Ghost Recon. There hasn't been like a Splinter Cell. You know, then they did that Avatar game, which was kind of like a strange choice because Avatar makes money at the movies, but nobody. It's not like a pop culture thing, right? Like you don't walk around with an Avatar T-shirt or really care about the world to the point where you know, like the expanded universe of Avatar outside of the cinema is non-existent, right?
Yeah.
So that's why it's a strange choice for a video game.
That's a very important point. That is really interesting, actually. Yeah, no one is walking around wanting to be one of them big blue people.
The Na'vi.
Yeah, no, which are very cool. Like I do.
Oh, like I think the movies are entertaining.
Yeah,
right?
so do
like,
I.
I'm not disparaging the movies. James Cameron's a brilliant director, right?
Yeah.
But it's not Star Wars. It's not Star Trek. It's
No.
not like, you know, it's not Lord of the Rings. It's not a franchise that, you know, like there's no like Lego. I mean, if there is a Lego set, like it's, you know, you'd have to order it special, like order in. You know what I mean?
the world of Pandora is interesting to me visually, but there isn't a part of me that wants to go, I want to explore this world through an interactive experience. Like I would just rather sit back and witness the world. So yeah, it's an important point, and I really like that.
Yeah.
But let's bring it back to Ubisoft. Sorry, a little Freudian slip there. So, Star Wars Outlaws releases to a flop. The Avatar game releases to a flop. And according to the internal memo, the Star Wars Outlaws is going to be fixed over the course of several updates, and Ubisoft CEO hopes that sales increase on a Black Friday weekend. The upcoming Black Friday sales, which is kind of it to me. This reads as grasping at straws. Like they're like, we're gonna fix the gameplay, which is, I would say, based on I haven't necessarily played it myself, but based on the reviews and what I've extensively read online, gameplay is the main criticism with Star Wars Outlaws. It's clunky. It's the gameplay, AI, and I think some beats of the story were slightly off for some people. I'm not too certain on that. But the gameplay aspect of what I have seen through videos and stuff like that does seem clunky. I'm not sure how they're going to make that smoother.
Like even actually like even just that technically, right? So like my impression of like playing a few hours of Outlaws was I'm like, okay, this feels like a game from, you know, like mechanics or gameplay, like something from the PS2 era or PS3, Xbox 360, in terms of like, you know, the animation wasn't quite, it's like, you know, jarring. Like if you jump up a platform, it feels like you're now like transitioning, like, you know, it's like a hard cut to like, to that. And like when you're going to stealth, it just feels like very robotic or very,
it lacks
you know,
fluidity.
Like, it's not fluid, right?
Yeah.
And which was strange because I'm like, okay, you use the Division engine or whatever it was, that Snowdrop engine, which actually looks good. Like the outdoor environments.
And the Division, we should say, is a successful
great game.
It's a successful franchise for Ubisoft.
Yeah, and it's the same team, so it's not like it's it's not like it's, you know, like it didn't have a chance to be great, right? So I mean, it just felt like it was just rushed out the door, right? Because, and I think that's why like Assassin's Creed was delayed, you know, like not to jump the gun, but like, you know, it's kind of like a case of like, okay, this feels kind of like just put together in a way where it's like we can get this out the door without having to spend, you know, way more resources just to do that final bit of like Naughty Dog.
Yeah, you know, that shine.
Sort of like that shine, whatever, that's super polished, that kind of like, because it's just a cinematic game, right? So like if you have that polish, then even if it is a simple stealth game, a simple action game, which is what it is, like you can enjoy it more
Yeah, I
than
agree.
something that's clunky or like, like those AI videos where the stormtroopers are just like glitching out or you know what I mean? Like anything, it just, all those things break immersion.
It feels like Ubisoft got it to the minimal viable product and then released it. That's what it felt like.
Exactly.
Yeah,
yeah.
they got it right onto the line where they're like, okay, it can be shipped. And then they shipped it.
Yes.
It didn't have that extra 5-10%, like you were saying, that, you know, that little bit of love that you put in afterwards to make it a very smooth experience for gamers. So that was flop. And this is the insight into Ubisoft's kind of like perspective on how they're viewing their titles. At least this is how I took away from it. Took away from the comments. So the Ubisoft CEO said the following. It's a continuation of the quote that I read before. Star Wars Outlaws initial sales proved softer than expected, despite solid ratings from players that recognize the game's faithful transcription of the original trilogy's essence and richness. He then went on to quote, gaming journalist publications such as Metacritic, PS Store, and Xbox and Epic. And the following scores are, I mean, the fact that he's even quoting these publications is, I mean, a red flag in my book, but this is what he wrote. 76 on Metacritic, 3.85 out of 5 on the PS Store, 4 out of 5.
That's user rating. That's just like, it's just a weird thing to gauge because, well, like I guess the reason why is because like there's always a vocal minority that's going to seem louder than that most people. So like to me, it's like most people probably saw this as a 7 out of 10 and didn't bother, right? Like, but they're not upset about it. But then you've got the people that are just like going online saying, "Oh my god, this is terrible. What have you done?" Blah blah blah. You know what I mean? Like, people that get
I just think he's chosen the wrong metrics, especially considering that. I mean, I looked, as soon as I saw that quote, I'm like, 76 on Metacritic. And now I'm like, Metacritic is, I'm pretty sure, is mostly critics, like verified.
Yeah, that's the critic score. That's the average critic score.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad score, by the way. Like, anything above 70 is kind of like okay, but not for like a major release. So, like, if The Last of Us Part 3 was like a 75 on Metacritic, that's going to be, that's going to be viewed as a disaster by the community, right? Because you want it to be like like the Zeldas where they get close to 90, 91 Metacritic score or like high 80s, which is like the dark green color, which represents that most people are thinking that it's brilliant.
Sure.
Not just pretty good.
This could be a hot take of some kind, but I genuinely don't care what any critic publication in whatever sense rates a title. This 76 score is based on 87 critic reviews from Metacritic. And funnily enough, right below that, we have the user scores, which are based on 2,248 user reviews. And the score for Star Wars Outlaws is 5.4. So to me, it's like you make games for gamers and the market is the be all and end all of your game succeeding. If your game doesn't get players, it doesn't matter how many IGNs, Metacritics, or whatever. If the critics are saying your game is good and the market doesn't play your game, you're not making the game for critics. You're making the game for gamers. So I think these are cherry picked. I mean, of course they are cherry picked. Metrics here, but I just think it's really funny that the Ubisoft CEO went onto Metacritic, typed up Star Wars Outlaws, saw the 76, and he's like, you know what, I'll use that one, and then right below it, it says user score 5.4, and he's like, don't worry about that one. Don't worry about that one.
The Metacritic user scores are a little volatile constantly because you get the review bombing, which is like fun, like whenever when like whatever it is, like a game goes on Steam and there's like an element where it's like DRM, where it's got like de novo copy protection, and people will flood the Metacritic and just like bomb the review score, give it a 0 and say like copy protection crap, blah blah blah. Like it's kind of like Rotten Tomatoes as well. Like I view it as like a bit more general, right? So like let's say like a film, the Rotten Tomatoes score is like 90% or whatever. To me, that doesn't mean that the movie is like a 9 out of 10. I just see that, okay, you've got 100 people, critics, that have viewed it. And so that means it's going, like there is something there. So it's like, it's all right. It might be good. It might be great. It might be just okay, but like it's not going to be an absolute disaster, right?
Yeah.
Because like if you've got that many people that know about this sort of stuff, like it's, but there's always going to be the odd thing where you disagree completely. But like it's usually like a pretty good gauge to say like, okay, this is going to be like a 3-star thing just going into it, right? Like, is it going to go higher? Am I going to like it more? Am I going to like it less? You know what I mean? And they have their user scores as well, which is kind of like a little bit different, where sometimes you get wild disparities between certain things. But like generally speaking, like the Metacritic score, when it gets to like about 80 to 100, if you see like 7, it just means that like if you play the game, you might go, meh, yeah, it's all right. Or you might go, no, this is great. But like it's usually not a absolute disaster. You know what I mean? Like an absolute trash.
I think I separate gaming and movies in particular with scores, because games you interact with and movies you witness. So
it's a passive.
I think it's a completely different ballpark in terms of the market itself. I think people that are, when you're playing games, you're interacting with the world that has been created in front of you. So it's not to say that it can be more objective. It's that there is more people that are probably playing, and because you've purchased it and you're actually involved in playing it, you're more likely to be writing a review on it because you're immersed within the world, while people just chuck on movies and go, oh yeah, that was all right, and then flick over to back to their Netflix show of whatever they're watching. I still don't think that they should be quoting critic scores when the general consensus of the game is a mixed bag, and especially considering that they admitted that the initial sales proved softer than expected. So this commercial kind of failure with Star Wars Outlaws,
it also could be like, right, so like it's a licensed game and it's Star Wars, so you have to understand as well that like a big chunk of that money is going to Lucasfilm and Disney.
Yeah, that's not my problem.
So like if they say soft, that could mean that it's sold okay, but like for Star Wars, they needed to sell like gangbusters. You know what I mean? Like you have to sell a lot more for like, like Sony would need to sell a lot more like Spider-Man to make money than, like their own IP or like Uncharted. Something
yeah, definitely. Yeah, the bar was higher, but it doesn't matter. Like again, that doesn't. Yes, okay, they had to spend more money to make this game. That still doesn't do much for the end user, which is, the be all and end all. The market, despite the review bombings, despite critic scores, despite everything, if no one is playing your game, then your product is poor. It does, and this is where I separate movies from games, is that you can have critically acclaimed movies that are underground, that are really like technically fantastic, and have a very unique story that no one's seen because of, it might be an indie publisher or whatever. With games, if the game is fantastic, despite it being indie, it will be discovered. There is people will play it.
Yeah,
and
like if there's a small audience, like even it can just be like a small audience too. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be like a smash hit.
Exactly right.
A great game. Like I just think that like, but when you're getting to like the level of, like a Star Wars game and a Ubisoft game, a AAA game, like AAA means that it is, which like the way I separate it, even if you want to compare it to movies, it's like, it's like we're talking about Marvel movies, we're talking about summer blockbusters, right? So like if it comes out and it's great and it flops, or like if you think it's like it was an okay film but it didn't make its money back at the box office, then it's a failure, right? Because that's a commodity, that's a product that's that was developed to make money,
Mm.
right? Whereas an indie film or an indie game is a passion project. They find a small audience and they recover their costs and people love it. And then maybe it's picked up by the community and Reddit, and then publications start talking about it. And then there's this groundswell of like, just word of mouth, kind of like with indie movies, like, like early Tarantino films or like Sundance Film Festival, where word of mouth spreads and you get these cult hits and all those sort of stuff that transcends. So I think that's like, it's different in that sense, where it's like Star Wars Outlaws is like this big Marvel movie, or even like a Star Wars Episode 9 comes to the cinemas. Like if it doesn't make 300 million in the opening weekend, it's not going to make back its budget, right?
Also involved, included in the leaked CEO memo was, and this is a particularly contentious point in relation to Assassin's Creed Shadows. Ubisoft made sure to tell its employees that it is an entertainment company first, and quote, its objective is not to endorse any specific agenda. This is definitely related to the choice of the protagonists in Assassin's Creed.
How that became a controversy. Yeah.
It's
like it's all based on that, those sort of like they don't want to. Well, like it seems like it's like a direct response for them to say like, hey, we don't want people online to be getting upset over any sort of specific choice or things like that. So just cater to mainstream tastes or wherever the pulse is, just cater to that from now on.
Yeah, well, they actually said during the memo that Ubisoft's goal is to make their games as widely available to like the widest breadth of gamers possible, and I think that is a part of the downfall as well, is that they were trying to cater for everybody and ended up catering for no one at the end. And look, I think the main problem really is at the start of when Shadows was announced, there was I think it was the game director or it was a Ubisoft developer official that was talking about the historical relevance of Shadows and how they were saying that players would learn stuff throughout it that is historically accurate, but it's still loosely based on history, etc., etc.
Which has always been Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, that has always been Assassin's Creed, but I don't think it's been such an egregious kind of stray from, like, they were kind of backpedaling now because they're saying that they're an entertainment company first and that they aren't endorsing a specific agenda. However, there was a job listing on their website that you would need to identify as a woman or a non-binary individual for you to be eligible for that job. So if that's not a criteria or discrimination, I don't know what is. So there is a certain degree of, let's say discrimination within the company or an agenda within the company to make sure that everyone is included. And that was a part of the protagonist's design choice. Now, I think
which is never like a like inclusion is not a bad thing, but like when it becomes everything, then it just becomes like no different to like any any sort of like agenda, like, you know what I mean? Like if you're just saying you want to be historically accurate, or like you can't like have like both worlds, right? Like if you're going to be like a World War II shooter and then all the the German soldiers, they all have to be white, right? Like like you can't like,
yeah, it'd be weird if
like,
they were
make
Mexicans
sense to change history in certain ways. Like but then like if it's a modern setting, like it makes sense because you look outside and the world is like, especially in Australia, it's multicultural, this and that. Like it will make no sense for it to be, like some Eastern European country in the 1930s, right? Like,
yeah,
it'll make no sense.
Yeah, and
so like there is just like a line that just needs to, like you can have it both ways. You just can't be like obviously or like very overtly whatever, one way or the other.
Yep. So in the lead up to Shadows, there was that really choppy animation trailer as well, and then we had bots diving into the comments section of that video, which all of their positive comments for Shadows have now been deleted. So this is just outlining the lead up to Shadows release, which was originally scheduled for early November. And I think it was just a few days ago, Ubisoft abruptly pulled out of the Tokyo Game Show, which is taking place right now. And all of this controversy surrounding the protagonists, the bots, the Star Wars Outlaws, and then we had what could be a slight stretch. I would like to err on the side of caution of this one, but it's definitely something, and we have to mention it because it is something that people got upset about. Ubisoft released a piece of merchandise that had both of the protagonists on it, on a what would you call it? It's kind of like a wooden stand pole or whatever, and the stand reflected a depiction of the one-legged Torii Gate, which is a sacred shrine in Nagasaki, and it is dedicated to the tragic event of the Nagasaki nuclear bomb. As it was one of the only things that was standing after the tragic blast. Now people are accusing Ubisoft of using, and there's an image of the one-legged Torii Gate and what was used in Ubisoft's merchandise, as they were pretty much piggybacking off of this tragic monument shrine.
That seems like ignorance to me.
What was that? Sorry,
nobody's like that seems like ignorance. It's like, but like almost like incompetence. It's like you should have a cultural advisor. You should have somebody aware of all the historical sites or like things that you're going to be using in promotion, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't go to like some random country and say, oh, that symbol looks cool, but I don't realize that that's like something about war.
Yeah,
or
historical
that has a negative
significance.
connotation, right? So you need to have that there. And if you don't have that, that's incompetent. I don't think it's a case of them going, oh, let's exploit a tragedy, because
that's a
very good point. So it's like there is, like, and to be incompetent is also bad, right?
Yeah.
Like that would be worse if you'd like naturally going, let's be cold, callous and exploit a tragedy where, countless people horrifically died, right? But like that's not necessarily the case. Like it doesn't make sense for a corporation to do that, right?
Yeah.
Especially at this scale.
And I completely agree with that, because
to be incompetent, for like as mismanaged as the marketing for this game has been, right? Like it just screams of just like, what are you doing? It's almost like you slap your head and you go like, now I just feel not sorry. Like I feel just like what are you doing? Like this is just
it's kind of like a Homer Simpson dough moment where he's like, dough.
Yes. It's like what else can you add to the pile?
Yeah, I didn't realize, and that was what you said was very important there, because I didn't think that this was like them sitting around a table going like, like we're gonna use this thing and it's gonna create a bunch of like it was a psyop marketing kind of scheme where you know, kind of like how Activision was like, oh, we're not gonna release the multiplayer of Modern Warfare 2 like when they first announced the remaster. And then everyone's like, well, why are you releasing the game then? Because Modern Warfare 2 was built on the multiplayer. Yes, it had a fantastic campaign. And then later down the line, they're like, oh, it's actually coming out. Like, it's like, you created the problem. But for those that don't see an issue with this depiction, many people are saying that you can... how many other designs for this poll thing could have you used? And also, I think the right way to argue this is if the Japanese people are upset about it, and judging from what I have read online, there seems to be a fair few of them as well. I think they're mischaracterizing the Japanese culture, and I think that's pretty important. And it's a part of the reason why I think that they've pulled out, not necessarily specifically with
but all
this,
and all the other controversies.
It's just a mounting
It's just
kind
like
of thing. But one
thing
to think about to bring it closer to home is imagine. I remember can't remember what Spider-Man game it was. I think it was the very first one from Insomniac Games, when they had the Twin Towers there and the massive web. Oh, no, sorry. It was the Spider-Man movies. I think it was...
okay. One of the, like, the Far From Homes or, like, the Homecoming.
One of them. There was a Spider-Man piece of content. It was either a game or the movies where they had... Pardon me.
Oh, yeah. Like, might have been one of the old movies.
Yeah,
like,
they had the Twin Towers and then they had the massive web in the middle, and he was sitting in the web. And they decided to remove that after, you know, that tragedy.
Yeah. I think that was like before. It was like it was a poster around that time. Yeah,
It'd be the exact same thing if the new Spider-Man game came out and they had the Twin Towers there. And
and like it's set in the 1980s or 1990s. And
it's a part of the marketing. It's a part of the marketing.
And it's part of the marketing to put these cool towers that we can see in these old photos. Like, you know, I wonder what happened to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of thing. Like it's
It reminds me of that tragedy.
It just adds on top. Like, to me, Assassin's Creed Shadows, like, you know, before it was announced, I'm like, okay, that's a great idea because that team worked on Odyssey, my favorite Assassin's Creed.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like, you saw, like, the animation, right? It's like Assassin's Creed is known for its parkour animation, right? And then you see, like, when they showed, like, the gameplay, like, the character movement was a little bit stilted or off. And then, you know, there was the most recent trailer where, like, the horse animation was just, like,
choppy,
sliding across the ground. And then you're showing, like, these are cherry-picked shots. It's like, okay, this seems like your game is unfinished now. Yes,
and that's what it really does that's what it really does stink of right now, because Ubisoft has delayed it. They said to February, but then in the internal memo that was leaked, it was specifically stated February 14th. And I don't know if you know, but do you know what month February is?
There's a whole bunch of games in that month.
It's nothing to do with games.
Oh. GPUs? I don't
know. No. I don't know how
games.
relevant this is. This is just a little bit of conjecture, but February is Black History Month.
Oh, okay. Yep. Oh, yeah.
And I think that might have a little something to do with the...
Like, I have no qualms with the character choice, because, like, Afro Samurai, there's been, like, a pop culture thing, because there has been, like, you know, records of, like, you know, black people in Japan, like, during the feudal times and things like that. So it's like, you know, it's like, it's not
completely left
to
field.
me, I'm not, like, worried about it, because, like, every game I'm playing somebody else, right? Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, but then I can understand, like, if you were Japanese and you were excited about Assassin's Creed set during that era, and you want to be, like, you know, somebody like a local from the history, just like with Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and it's like, you know, Cassandra was like a great, because it's like, oh, she's like, you know, this strong ancient Greek, right? And, like, you know, I'm part Greek, so it felt like really cool.
Exactly, yeah, you felt connected to it.
That sort of aspirational element of it is really cool, because you got that single degree of separation. So I can understand, I have no qualms with people being upset over the character choices.
Yeah.
But I have no issue with it.
That is exactly how I feel about it as well.
Yep.
I think my main concerns lie with the Japanese people and their heritage being mischaracterized.
Yep.
I think that is the right way to argue it. So that is something to think about, and I think that's a little bit of positive. I think that'll soften the blow, so to speak, for Shadows when it comes out. I think it's a bit of a healthier time for them to release such a project, given the controversy surrounding it.
Yep.
And I think I've got another point here. I've lost my spot.
I mean, the final point would be that this is make or break for Ubisoft regardless.
Oh, yes.
Because of all the things we mentioned, right? The Avatar being, like, you know, like, why? Star Wars Outlaws not being a soft whatever sales, and the big gap of like massive games before then. Like the last Far Cry didn't do very well, but it's been a few years since that. There hasn't been a big Tom Clancy Ghost Recon type game. There hasn't been Splinter Cell. This Assassin's Creed Shadows is the first one since 2020's Valhalla, which is the last major game in the franchise and arguably their biggest franchise, right? So if the stock price of Ubisoft is, free fall at the moment,
which it is,
or has been for a while,
59% down in the past year.
So so Shadows is essentially make or break. It's not like a delay to make the game better. Great, right? Always a good sign, right? Like we wish CD Projekt did that one more time with Cyberpunk, So, but they got there in the end. But this feels like a a bit more important, right? And that's probably why they're dropping that season pass model. Remember, we were discussing how when they announced it, it's like spend $150 US sight unseen to get the game and all these expansions. Now they're saying we're not doing the season pass. Everybody who gets the game early or on day one will get the first expansion for free, and there's no season pass that's going to be with the game at launch. There might be expansions that they release down the road.
It's a single player game. We don't need a season pass.
Which is fine, right? So, but that's like a change in direction as well. So that's a deliberate response to feedback, right? To all the stuff that you've been saying for years, right? About Ubisoft's season pass models and the insane prices for what are single player games.
And
so
also the 3-day early access thing. We don't need to do that. It's not WoW.
Yeah. And exactly. So it's basically, to me, it seems like they're going, okay, like we need this to hit. And
this is a dire time for the company. And to illustrate that even further, Insider Gaming's Tom Henderson reported that Ubisoft's board of directors has launched an internal investigation and review into the performance of the company. Now, what does this mean? Typically when this happens, and if holes are found, which judging by the stock price and the products that they are releasing, they will be discovered.
There's corrections.
They are probably going to get their house cleaned, likely sold, bought by another developer. There'll be a change of management, a switch of direction. They can't keep
Ubisoft
going in this direction because judging by the stock price, they're going to go bankrupt. So if my prediction is anything, it is that there's going to be some switching of employees over at Ubisoft,
and a change of the guard.
I think over the next 5 years, I think it returns to, or I hope, maybe this is like a naive, optimistic view, because Ubisoft has made some of my favorite games. Like I'm a big guy, a big Rayman fan. I love Splinter Cell. Like there was the early Assassin's Creed game like defined the genre, and I mean that is the continuous copy and paste that we have got ever since the first Assassin's Creed game, and has ultimately led to the position of where they are right now. So I think over the next 5 years, and if they change their management up, which I think could really, I mean, it has to benefit them, right? Because they can't keep doing what they're doing. We could start to see Ubisoft return to the former glory that it once was.
Hopefully. Yeah.
I hope so. We might do a dedicated YouTube video kind of outlining Ubisoft's history and where it has got today. I think that it's an interesting topic to talk about, given how this is one of the biggest game publishers and developers on the market. Like this is for them to delay an Assassin's Creed and the flop of Star Wars Outlaws. Like this isn't a small thing to happen. And also a small thing, or not a small thing to happen, is Concord. Let's get on to that. Do you have $400 million that I can spend, Kosta?
Yeah, like there's no, like obviously like Concord costs costs a lot of money. But I think the 400 million figure might be overstated, because I think if you look at Concord before it released, I think Sony realized that they had a flop and they just probably cut the marketing budget because it wasn't a game that was like heavily marketed, right? Like we know there's a lot of people out there, like people that aren't following the news daily like us. They don't even know what Concord is, right?
Yeah, true.
Like it's not on buses. There was no billboards. There was no like ads. And we've seen Sony go all out with marketing, right? I mean, they have great marketing. So with Concord, I think it cost like a couple $100 million because 8 years in development and game budgets are like so big. And I think that they probably earmarked like hundreds of millions more for marketing, which is what these developers were saying, where they got that figure from. But I think they saved some money at the 11th hour of saying, yeah, we're not going to spend 80 million marketing this game.
Yeah. I think judging on the rumors. So for those that don't know and haven't heard of Concord, like Kosta was saying,
there's probably a few people.
There's probably a few people that are like, what the hell is Concord? I'm like, well, according to the rumors and which are from sources that are close to the development team of Concord, which is Firewalk Studios, Concord was meant to be, quote unquote here, the future of PlayStation. It was a title that began development in 2018. I'm pretty sure it's 2018. So we should just a little bit of quick backstory on this. Firewalk Studios was owned by Probably Monsters. Probably Monsters and Firewalk are teams that are made of Probably Monsters is kind of like an incubation. I think on their website, they're an incubation company where they help foster developers to make new titles.
Yep.
And they're made up of former Bungie and Activision developers. So 2018, Probably Monsters is founded, and shortly after, Firewalk Studios is founded and development on Concord begins. I think in the early 2020s. Concord is brought under the PlayStation banner, and I'm guessing with that is a massive injection of cash from Sony. And in 2023, Probably Monsters sells Firewalk Studios to Sony, and the rumors say that another $200 million was poured into the project as of 2023. Now, that is an important point because
you're building a studio at the same time, right? It's not like you've got a studio of like a massive team at Blizzard, 300 people, is now moving on to this game. So it's like all like establishing that studio from scratch, which is what Firewalk Studio is like. It was like a small team, and then you get bigger. You're under Sony's umbrella. They inject more money, so you expand your studios, you hire more people. So that cost is like huge as well.
Yeah,
on
it's
top
big.
of the budget of the game.
The additional $200 million in 2023, rumors indicate that it was to outsource development. Now, this timeline has me asking a few different questions. So it appears that in 2018, 2019, 2020, Firewalk Studios was in contact with Sony, showing them off whatever they had for Concord during this time period. Sony obviously being quite happy with whatever they saw for the current state of the game, decided to just buy up Firewalk Studios. Probably Monsters wipes their hands with the project. They're out. Firewalk is now owned by Sony in 2023. And then once the acquisition goes through, the additional rumored $200 million is injected. Now, to me, that is a red flag that they got the project. They received Concord and went, oh shit, this game isn't finished. We need to outsource development and spend double the budget to even get it to a minimal viable product. That is, I think, a pretty, if I was to give a professional opinion on it, this seems like an accurate kind of assessment, especially considering the other rumors saying that Sony believed that this was a quote-unquote Star Wars-like project for them. This was going to generate money for many more years to come. Players would be coming back. It would be
merchandise.
What was that? Sorry.
Et cetera. like like it's like merchandising. So like they released a limited edition controller for it.
Yeah.
That would have been like step one. Then you can have like like they wanted to turn it into like another franchise, like an Uncharted or whatever. They want it to be like a pillar.
Yeah.
Like yeah. And for them to call it their Star Wars, it's because of the sci-fi fantasy element of it, right? So like Uncharted, Last of Us, all these franchises that they have, including Spider-Man, right, which we associate with PlayStation. They aren't,
They're not
they
perpetual
aren't like
universes.
sci-fi, right? They're not like Star Wars, like then it's not Star Wars, it's not Guardians of the Galaxy, it's not like like a comic book thing. So like they were seeing it like in that light of like, oh, this is our,
That's
we
exactly
can make
right.
a movie out of this, right?
So how did we get to what was the catastrophic flop of Concord? And we should just say this isn't just like a flop like the Borderlands movie or even Star Wars Outlaws. This is a flop in the sense where Sony made literally zero money because they refunded anyone that bought the game. So this is a big fat
The risk is high.
zero on their profit margin sheets for this title. And if the rumored $400 million is true, that would be the equivalent of Marvel releasing a new movie and literally zero people going to see that movie. That's the level we're talking about here. If the $400 million is true. So how did we get to why Concord failed? Why did it fail? So according to this source, Firewalk Studios was an environment that had toxic positivity and developers weren't allowed to say anything negative about the game. That is an environment that only creates yes men around you. And
that it's something that we've
unhealthy.
heard. Like it's something that's been around forever, right? Like there's stories of this sort of stuff happening with movies and TV shows.
Yeah, you don't listen to
projects.
Yeah,
and
genuine criticisms.
Sometimes it works, right? Like like James Cameron, like is the boss of his film, right? Like
Tarantino as well.
They might be yes men, or they might agree 100% with his vision, or like but it is still like having a small group of people driving the creative vision of a project is not uncommon. But like when it's like there's obvious red flags and then nobody's speaking up, or like it's just purely like it's all great, we're doing God's work, so to speak. Then it just looks like then once you have the hindsight of like it absolutely flopped and failed, then you're like, oh, okay, that was a major, like the issues go back to like the design. Like there was no stage where it was something brilliant that fell apart, so to speak. Like it was destined to fail.
These allegations of there being a toxic positivity environment were actually corroborated by Ethan Gage from Kotaku. He took to X and said the following: I can corroborate the part about toxic positivity. Some sources I've spoken with blamed a head in the sand mentality carried over from the studio's Bungie roots. They sensed the game would come together because the team was too good to fail. I'll have more next week.
Yeah, so like that was the same situation with like BioWare and like Anthem. Like remember that game?
That's a
their
good one.
Multiplayer game, right? So before that, they were single player studio. They did Mass Effect and Dragon Age Inquisition, which won like multiple awards.
Yeah,
and a lot of people liked, right? But that was that was a troubled development, like where people it changed direction multiple times. And like the deep dive like expose stories that obviously weren't official, but like these of like how it was like apparently that game came together at the 11th hour, and they attributed that to the fact that, hey, we're BioWare, it'll always work out, right? And it was a similar situation with Bungie and Destiny, and it's that mentality. It's like even if there are issues, they don't see it because they just assume that it's all going to come together at the end.
That is
and it didn't for Anthem,
failure.
And it flopped. Yeah. Right? Yeah. It's just stupidity. And then you look at it and you're like, okay, yeah.
See, the toxic positivity, this is just something I wrote in my article that was talking about this. cross-referencing the rumored timeline with the official dates, adding in the rumored toxic positivity of the workplace and the market reaction to the end product, it now appears Concord was completely oversold to Sony as a concept. The publisher flooding an additional $200 million in 2023 to outsource development indicates the game wasn't in a healthy state at this time. And Sony really wanted to bring the title to market in hopes it would turn out like the next Star Wars. Now, I believe that but Sony's apparently CEO, like the head of PlayStation, was specifically mentioned in this as being a massive Concord. Like he thought it was going to be the next big thing. And what I think has happened here is they received the product in 2023 and then it just was not shaping up to what they thought it was going to be. And I bet they thought Concord was going to be the game that pushes sales of the PlayStation 5 Pro. I reckon they had, for the state of play, they had some stuff planned for Concord. Yeah. And because that kind of felt like a state of play. The biggest thing that happened during that presentation was the sequel to Ghost of Tsushima. Yeah. How do you say it?
Tsushima.
Yeah.
I don't know. Ghost of Tsushima.
Tsushima. And I think that game is good. Yotai.
Yeah, Ghost of Yotai.
Yeah, Yotai.
Looks cool. Yeah.
Which looks very good. But that was pretty much the only thing in that presentation. I bet you they had stuff planned for Concord. And I bet you that they had stuff planned, especially if these budgetary figures are correct. If they spent $400 million, I bet you that they were hoping Concord was going to be a massive hit and it was going to help push sales of the PlayStation 5 Pro when it came out. Except 873 people played the game, and the people that bought the game, they ended up giving, like, I think revenue wise, they made just over like $1 million or just shy of $2 million.
Now, like a box copy is like a collector's edition.
Yeah, and then they gave all that money back anyway, and the servers are shut down. So I think their knees were kind of taken out from under them when the market reacted, or the lack of reaction to the Concord releasing. It kind of stuffed up their marketing plan for the PlayStation 5 Pro and what they were going to show in the state of play. And also, just to touch back on the Star Wars perspective of the title, I remember you were telling me about all of the animations, how much money they spent on the animations for this game. Like now that kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. Like it was weird. So it was like their whole idea was that we've created this amazing universe, right? So we're going to spend tons of money to create like highly detailed real-time or pre-rendered cinematics. Yeah. And we're going to release them every week, and each one's going to go for like a minute or 2 minutes, and it's going to flesh out the universe. And that's going to take a team of like 100 people or 200 people just to do this, which has nothing to do with the mechanics or the gameplay, right? If you look at like even if you try and compare it to like what Blizzard does with the Overwatch shorts and their cinematics team, right? Which is like incredible, right?
Yeah, it's very good.
They would release a new one every 6 months, every 9 months. Or like, at BlizzCon or whatever the case may be, and it is, the quality of it is as good as anything you're going to see
in the movies,
right? Yeah, but like that, I've seen their cinematics department. I've been to like the Blizzard HQ like a couple of times, and that's a massive team, right? But even that big team can only produce like a 3 or 4 minute short every year, right? Or like, they can only do like 1 or 2 of those, because there's just so much effort that goes into it, right? But that's a separate team at Blizzard than the game developers, right?
Yeah.
They collaborate, but it's a separate team. So it's almost like they created 2 teams for Concord, which was the people working in the game and the people doing this weekly story stuff, right? Like, and you're looking at 2, and then maybe that's how the budget blew out to 400 million, right? So like maybe my initial idea is completely wrong, because if you think about it, like you've got 2 teams, right? You're making a quote unquote movie as well as a quote unquote game. So like that just balloons costs.
Yeah.
And I think that direction was also, obviously in hindsight, completely misguided and makes no sense, because you establish your game first or your universe. You do like a few little things like that, but you don't put all your eggs in this basket of like people are going to tune in every week to watch the latest episode or the latest short of this universe. Like, and you planned it out for like a year's worth of that.
Yeah.
Like, they were working on a year's worth of it.
Yeah.
Which means that there's already 6 of them in the pipeline. There's 15 in development, some in pre-production, some in post-production, like a whole full-on Pixar studio working on this sort of stuff.
And animations, like you said, it is not
easy.
cheap.
That's right.
It is not cheap.
It takes a lot of people.
It like as soon as this Star Wars like project quotes were coming out, the first thing I thought of was what you were telling me on. I'm pretty sure you were saying it on the podcast, right?
Yeah, most likely.
Yeah. Most likely. That's the first thing I thought. I'm like, that makes sense with what Kosta was saying with the animations. If they thought it was like a Star Wars like universe, this batch of animations and this makes sense. This episodic releasing, like they really did think it was going to be the next big thing. Yeah. So that is kind of where we're at right now with Concord. I don't know if we're ever going to find out. Like,
I mean,
I think maybe in Sony's next quarterly financial update, we'll probably get some details in there somewhere. But
I think the studio will be shut down. I think Sony's going to wipe their hands clean.
There's
no way it comes back even as a free-to-play thing.
Yeah.
Like I said, like enough time will pass that it's going to be completely forgotten, that I think they don't even need to announce that it's not coming back, right? I think it's enough time will pass. Somebody might ask them and say, like whatever. I think all we're just going to hear is that Firewalk Studios is closed at some point.
Yeah, I want to get into contact with someone that's at Firewalk Studios. I want to see if I can learn some more about it, because this is, one of the biggest, if the budgets are correct, Sony's biggest budgetary failure ever. That is not to be understated. So yeah, that's pretty much where we're at right now. I feel pretty bad for everyone that was at Firewalk Studios, because I'm guessing, like you said, that studio is going to get closed down. I think the people at Probably Monsters are laughing, considering that they sold their project in 2023, a year before it turned into a $400 million hole in Sony's wallet. So whatever they sold their development studio for, they're laughing all the way to the bank. I kind of think, and this is just a little bit of my personal opinion here, I think Probably Monsters was in the ear of Sony, telling them that their game was going to be the next big thing, or quote unquote the future of PlayStation, and they convinced Sony. And then they gave him the product, and they bought their development studio. And as soon as that deal went through and their hands were shaken, they started to laugh, because I bet you they knew that their game was, or they were just I
think they knew. Yeah, like I said, like there was no real marketing for this. Like they knew, like this was probably going out to die. Like they had a feeling. They just thought that they would. Maybe they could recoup some, or maybe it would find an audience. Yeah. Maybe there's a chance. There's probably still people that believe in it. Yeah. But it got to a point where they decided we're not going to market this like Uncharted 4 or 5. We're not going to market it like one of these games. Yeah,
especially considering if they already spent so much money on it as well, and they weren't fully confident in it. But that's enough about that. Maybe Concord deserves its own little YouTube video as well.
It deserves a post-mortem.
Post-mortem?
That's what they call it, yeah. Like even like in a positive or negative, right? Like so like at the games developers. Yeah. Like there's like post-mortems for like they do like you call those presentations where you talk about like how it was made, stuff like that. Yeah,
that is awesome. No, I do love that. But let's talk hardware. I love hardware. Yep. We all love hardware here. Talk to me about the latest 5090 rumors.
Yeah, so there is one leaker, Copite7 Kimmy on X, who is
we've referenced them.
Yeah, when he posts specs, that means it's locked in.
We
heard a few weeks ago that Nvidia was going to finalize the 5090 and the 5080 specs this month, and so here we are near the end of September, and we know the specs for the 5090 and the 5080 are high level hardware specs. So the 5090 is going to, we know the chip name, but we know it's going to have 21,760 CUDA cores, which is a lot.
Damn. What's that compared to the 4090?
I think it's like a 30% whatever plus increase.
Oh, okay.
It's going to have 32 gigs of GDDR7 memory on a 512-bit bus.
Same,
which is
bus
1.7 terabytes or something like that, or 2 terabytes, close to 2 terabytes a second memory bandwidth.
That's insane.
Which is insane.
Wait,
right?
sorry to cut you off, but just for comparison's sake, so the 4090 is 24 gig of
GDDR6X.
6X.
Yep.
And it's still on the 512. I'm pretty sure it's still on the 512 bit memory bus, right?
Let me just confirm that.
I'm just trying to illustrate the difference between the 4090 and the rumored 5090.
No, 384-bit.
Okay. Yep. So the memory bus is wider on the rumored 5090. Yep. Go ahead.
And
sorry.
like the 4090 is still insane, right? Because it
yeah.
can hit 1 terabytes a second of memory bandwidth, but this one's going to like almost like double it. Well, like it gets to like a 60+% increase. And we've talked about it previously, but like actually like memory speed, not just capacity, but memory bandwidth, like which is why like you've got like the cache and the L2 cache in these modern GPUs, but that affects performance. Like it actually makes a tangible difference.
At higher resolution?
Yeah, like you can see like, or even all resolutions, you can see like even like a 10% increase in performance just from memory bandwidth.
I was thinking, why, and this is just a guess from me here. Wider memory bus, more memory that's faster would benefit more at the higher resolutions.
Yes.
At 4K. When there's more, like, so this is more of like, obviously it's a 5090 being the most powerful card that NVIDIA is going to offer. It's going to be aimed for like 4K 240 hertz. Like that's where we're going to see the difference between the 4090 and the 5090 is at those higher end resolutions and frame rates. Is that something?
Yeah,
is that an accurate assessment?
And path tracing and ray tracing and AI, like all these places where memory like impacts performance like directly. Yep. So that's definitely going to be the case. But like I there's also that this could essentially like give it a boost. That this is like another avenue where NVIDIA will be able to boost performance compared to the previous gen, right? By increasing the memory capacity and the memory bandwidth. They could, if they had the same memory configuration as the 4090, which is still like, top class. But then, the more CUDA cores or the other new architecture,
that's a lot.
It'll be like, let's say it's like that makes it 35% faster. But with the new memory that now it's 50% faster. But, it could be, or it could be a case of like now it was 50% faster, now it's 70% faster because of the increased memory bandwidth on average. You know what I mean? Like it actually affects performance.
Yep.
In that
a substantial way.
As big as that, right? Yeah. Like it's actually quite huge. So we know that the memory is going to be insane. We know that the CUDA core count is going to be crazy. But we also that the leaker has confirmed 600 watts for the 5090. So that's confirmed, and that's obviously peak power, right? That doesn't necessarily mean, as we know with the 40 series, these GPUs don't run at their max. I mean, all GPUs don't run at their max power all the time, but if you're playing, whatever high-end game is out by the time that launches, or even just current games that are Call of Duties and whatever else that are coming out over the next few months, pushing 600 watts constantly is going to be insane for a GPU.
Yeah, you might need a new power supply of some kind.
Yes, yeah. So with as we saw in part of our factory tour, So I have posted a story saying,
"Be careful."
There's multiple routes that they can go, right? So the Founders Edition, apparently, there's another leaker saying that no, it's just a single connector on it for 600 watts, and if one single connector can have a maximum of 600 watts, what's going to happen, etc., etc. And
Wait,
posted, or I posted, like, we've seen the new power supplies with two 12-volt 16-pin connectors.
Who posted
And
that?
so, and there will be like overclocked models of the 5090s that would probably make use of two if they're going to push 700 watts or 800 watts or whatever the case is to get more performance out of it. But how do you get 600 watts over a single cable? Either you split it over two, or you rely on the motherboard to actually deliver 75 to 100 watts
Of
over
additional power.
PCIe.
Yeah.
And we know that this next gen, the GeForce cards are going to be Gen 5 PCIe. The 40 series was still Gen 4 because of the bandwidth speed. Increasing the bandwidth speed is also as well to hit 4K 240 hertz. It's going to be DisplayPort 2.1 to hit 4K, or to hit like resolutions and frame rates that nobody's hitting.
Yeah, 8K 60 on a single cable.
That nobody's seeing really. Nobody's going to see.
It's just a
let's be honest.
bit of a tangent, I suppose. I remember when I was benchmarking GPUs, we had an 8K display, and it required two. At the time, I wasn't as educated as I am now about tech, but so I don't know what DisplayPort version or spec that was being used, but the 8K display required two DisplayPort cables. You could not run 8K 60 on a single DisplayPort, which was very cool considering where we're at now, where we can do that over one cable, which is it's cool. Anyway, go on. Sorry, it's just a little bit of history.
Definitely. And so the 5090 is going to be a beast. And multiple sources are also confirming that CES is when that timeline that we've heard of, like January, which is CES is at the very beginning of January, is going to be announcement, and launch will be around then too.
Yeah.
And with that, the 5080 specs have also been leaked by the same person. And so the 5080 is going to be probably like noticeably less powerful than the 5090. Like there is going to be like a big discrepancy, just like with the 4080 and the 4090, there's like about a 20%, but this one looks like there's going to be dramatically different. Like the 5090 is going to be this Halo product that is just going to cost an insane amount, and it's going to be unbeatable. The 5080 will be a little bit more down to earth because the CUDA core count is almost half. Everything is almost half. It's almost like the 5090 is going to be two 5080s. This doesn't mean that the 5090 is going to be double the performance, right? It doesn't, performance doesn't scale linearly when it comes to like specs, right?
Yeah.
Like that's never the case. But the 5080s have got like close to 11,000 CUDA cores, that's compared to the almost 22,000 on the 5090, right? So that's almost like 50%. You're looking at a 16 gigs of GDDR7 memory on a 256-bit wide memory bus, which is like half the memory bandwidth and half the memory capacity as the 5090. But it is a 400-watt GPU, so it might be clocked higher, most likely. We don't know the specific clock speeds. That's one thing that hasn't been leaked. But that means that the 5080 is going to be a lot more, quote-unquote, affordable compared to the 5090.
I'm really interested to see what the 50, because we know the popularity of the 4070. I want to see what the 5070.
I want to see the 5070. Yeah, so do I.
Just as like a kind of like a, I suppose, a bit of a reference, I suppose, because we've got the Halo product of the 5090 that is just unbeatable, and we know, for those that don't know, AMD is not going to be competing at the higher end of NVIDIA's product stack, so we're not going to get a 5090 competitor, possibly even a 5080 competitor. I reckon they're going to go. What do you think?
No, we're not. Like
there'll be nothing that hits 5080 performance from Radeon.
That's right, and they may not be able to hit 5070 performance if,
given these stats,
and if NVIDIA decide to tune the 5070 to be, because like what we've heard performance wise is that the 5090 is going to be about 60 to 70% faster than the 4090.
It's crazy.
Anywhere between 50 to 70, which is huge.
That's
right?
massive.
Massive. And judging by these specs, yeah, mate, that's probably what they're going for, right?
Yeah.
What we've heard with the 5080 is that it's going to be more powerful than the 4090 by about 10%.
Wow.
Which would be about 30+% faster than the 4080, right? Which would make, and if it's using less power than the 4090, it's like a more efficient 4090, but it's more powerful and it's probably going to have noticeably better ray tracing. And that's going to be a monster too, right?
Yeah.
Untouchable. And NVIDIA know that. And if they price that card at the $1,000, whatever it is, and they probably will, there's no competition.
Yeah.
Right. And there's actually there's no other option.
Yeah, that is true.
So, but when it comes to the 5070, if they target 40, 80 plus levels of performance or just faster, then AMD's mid-range option is not going to be able to compete with that. You know what I mean? Like there's just a huge gap. Like there's just this breadth of gap if they're pushing performance forward that much.
Yep.
That NVIDIA might double down on their market share and premium status and have the 5070 be more expensive than AMD's card, which is probably the case because AMD's using more cost-effective memory, et cetera, nodes, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But then the 5070 will be like, okay, it's going to be more expensive because you've got better performance, you've got DLSS 4, whatever that's going to be, you've got our drivers, you've got the GeForce RTX brand naming, and guess what? It's more powerful than the 5080, or in some cases it matches the 4090 in some games, right? Because the 4070 got close to 3090 levels of performance in a lot of games.
Yeah.
Sometimes surpassed it, but like sometimes it didn't because of the 3090 had 24 gigs of memory and it was just a monster anyway. But, it did it at like half the power, right? It hit that level of performance at half the power. So it is an uphill battle for AMD. And with the specs for the 5080 and the 5090, NVIDIA will unfortunately once again be able to dictate the terms. You know what I mean?
Yes.
If you've got no competition, you dictate the terms and you base that on your performance level. And they can tune their performance to just be better than AMD.
Yeah.
Because AMD is going to launch their mid-range cards for the very first time before NVIDIA. So NVIDIA will be able to tune the 5070 based on knowing exactly how AMD's mid-range GPUs
Will play out.
perform
Yeah.
for months, because the 5070 is probably not going to arrive until April, May next year or June, because the 4070 now is selling like hotcakes. The 4070 Super is selling better now because is obviously the next topic that we're going to talk about, but like GPU sales are on the rise.
Yeah.
Apparently, shipments are on the rise, and if you look at the Steam data, the GPUs that are selling really well are the 4070, the 4060, 4070 Super. So there's, if those sales are now increasing based on games like Black Myth Wukong and all these, like there's, you got Dragon Age, you got all these games coming out that people are interested about. Monster Hunter is coming to PC early next year. Like people are going to be upgrading now because there are games. And they're going to be choosing those cost-effective GPUs, right?
Yeah.
And that's why AMD wants to get out quickly, because they know that. They want to get their mid-range options out soon.
So you don't think Intel's new rumored Arc Battle Mage GPU is going to compete with the 5090?
No, I mean, there's that other story. Like if we quickly go on it, like, yeah. So Battle Mage, that like one of the desktop GPUs had a benchmark result leak. It's a Geekbench, so it's a single benchmark, so it's not indicative of in-game performance, but it positioned it kind of like similar to the current gen Arc desktop GPUs. But the only benefit is that we could be looking at a budget model that's more powerful than their current flagship. But that's not saying much, because Intel Arc GPUs, the A750 compared to the A770, it's only like 10% difference in performance. They never hit their 3070 target, right?
Yeah.
They never hit it.
3070 target.
Yeah, so the current Arc lineup, there is no GPU that's more powerful than or on par with the 3070.
Yeah.
And that's 2 generations behind.
Yeah.
So this needs to hit, like Battle Mage needs to hit minimum 40, 60 levels of performance, bare minimum. But it needs to kind of like get close to 4070, right? They need to be in that range to compete.
I completely agree.
Or even to make a name for yourself. Like if you yeah, like, so it's disappointing that the benchmarks are pointing to not much of a improvement. Efficiency wise, yes, because it's less, it's like, 20 of their cores, like, which is their like CUDA core equivalent or compute unit equivalent. So 20 of those Battle Mage XE2 cores is performing as well as 32 XE2 cores for the first gen ARC. So there is an efficiency improvement, but we want to see a performance improvement.
Absolutely.
Like, efficiency is great, but like, we want to see performance to match. So that's like
Gamers
why the 40
care
series
about
is great.
performance. Unfortunately, they
Yes,
don't care
unfortunately.
about efficiency.
No. If it's just efficiency, then they don't care.
Yeah, and I think, and we'll get into this with a story that will round off this episode. Yeah, an example of that, just quickly, is the recent release of the 9000 series by AMD, and that's on the CPU front. For those that aren't familiar, but we'll get into that at the end. Pardon me. Reese, get rid of that cough, please.
Or leave it in.
No. Now it's left in.
No, don't leave it in.
Now it's left in.
Yeah, so the 5090 is going to be a monster, like, and we want to be at CES, so we'll need to knuckle down
we need
over the next couple of weeks to try and get ourselves there.
Yeah,
because it's going to be huge, and we want to be able to cover this on the ground, as well as go hands-on with whatever we can, right?
Yeah.
Because it's going to be huge. Because, like, judging by this, like, it's crazy, right? Like, you're looking at, I mean, Intel is a non-entity, as we're going to get into when it comes to GPU stuff, but they're going to be launching something new, right? So you have to look at it, right? You have to.
It's Intel. You got to
dig
look
into it. You have to test it. You have to
you
be like,
look,
all right,
you kind of shield your eyes when you're doing it. You're like, oh, what's that? Oh.
And you've got AMD releasing at least 2 SKUs, right? So they're going to have the 8800 XT and then their mainstream 8700, or the more affordable version, or the 8700 XT, whatever, Radeon, whatever they're going to call it. So they're going to have at least 2 GPUs. And then you've got NVIDIA with the 2 high ends, the 5090 and 5080. So the good thing is that these aren't comparable, right? So we can look at what AMD is doing in a bubble, and the only reference is what's already out there, right? The only reference is how does it perform compared to your current Gen 7000 series, and what we see from like the 4070s and the 4070 Supers, right? Or even like the 4080, right? That's all we're going to compare that to. When it comes to the 5090 and the 5080, that's the brand new, exciting, shiny, super expensive, but super powerful, brand new hotness, where it's like, okay, how much better than the 4090 are you? What can you do? Like, oh my God, I'm playing this game at 250 FPS with ray tracing. What the hell's going on? Like, that's its own class of thing. And then you got Intel, kind of like, what, you're going to have a budget option, a mainstream option. Are you going to even be able to get any sort of mind share with all of this happening at the same time? Probably not.
Yeah.
So it's just going to be, but that's all happening at the same time.
That makes you want to squint. You're like, is that thing on? What's going on there?
Yeah.
Is that
so
on?
all of that's happening at CES apparently.
Yes, we do need to get to CES, that's for sure, because there is a lot of stuff coming out then. But let's move this along to the PlayStation 5 Pro. There is a few things to talk about here, and we have limited time. So we'll do our best to get through this quickly and promptly. Did you want to start off with the
yes.
double?
So the performance, so like we discussed the announcement in detail, right? So like we talked about how there was a lukewarm reception, $699. Compressed YouTube videos where it's like, look at the difference between this tiny square and this tiny square, and we'll zoom in and we're like, which one's the Pro version?
Yeah.
And like, the 30 FPS versus 60 FPS, you can tell the difference. You're like, okay, that's smoother. But it was like all existing games, you couldn't really tell the visual difference, and it costs more than and the price has gone up. So it was kind of like, okay. But since that time, over the past week, a lot of people have gone hands-on with the tech, including Digital Foundry and stuff like that.
The goats.
And Sony has released like a full like blog post just of like, key developers talking about the Pro and what it brings to their games. Like, Polyphony Digital, who developed Gran Turismo 7, the 4K 60 mode, the on-track is going to have ray tracing. In-race ray tracing, where you see the reflections on your car, the hoods next to you. It adds to the immersion. But people that have actually played it, like Digital Foundry, have said that PSSR, their upscaling solution, which is AI based like DLSS, is actually delivering higher image quality than the base version of the PS5, right? So their PSSR is actually a great addition, and it's very promising because it's like, okay, now the games look cleaner and crisper. It's a better solution than what they were using previously, whether that was AMD's FSR or their own checkerboard rendering or their own internal upscaling, which would, add artifacts and aliasing and things like that. So PSSR is great.
That makes me
now
happy.
You've got better fidelity, and now you've got better, faster resolution. So Spider-Man 2 and Ratchet and Clank confirmed that the fidelity modes with ray tracing, or those 30 FPS modes on PS5, are now running at full 60 FPS on the PS5 Pro. And with PSSR, it looks cleaner, it looks crisper.
Good.
And people that have seen side-by-side comparisons, it's kind of like that thing where like the first time you saw a 4K Blu-ray versus an initial Blu-ray, if it was like a quick glance, you'd be like, okay, what's the difference? But then once you see them side by side for a bit, you're like, oh, all right, that's a very notable difference.
I have a question.
And that's kind of like what you're getting.
I didn't watch the Digital Foundry video. I should, really. But how was the noise around the PSSR? Because we know that these upscaling technologies, they typically have a bit of noise with the frame or in certain parts of...
Oh, like ghosting and things like that.
Stuff, because we
there
knew...
was
What
shimmering.
was that? Remind me that NVIDIA denoiser. That was
like ray reconstruction.
Yeah, that was very, very impressive. Is the PSSR, does it suffer from the same problem, or is it quite smooth?
So, like it is like a massive improvement over FSR or like the console version of AMD's FSR. But it is closer to DLSS. They kind of compare it to like Intel's version, which is actually pretty good, but like nobody really uses it because
Battle Mage can't be seen.
Because
we
like
don't know where
0%.
it is. Where is it?
Because they have a 0% market share.
Yeah.
As well.
Oh yeah, we'll get into that.
But it is not quite on par with DLSS, which makes sense because NVIDIA have been working on DLSS for like 6 years, right? And there's new versions all the time. So there are like some shimmering, some like ghosting, some artifacts. That is normal, but like it's not necessarily like noticeable or glaring. But like they compared it to, like one of the big examples was like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, that game. Like that game on the baseline PS5 has a 60 FPS performance mode, right? But that is using AMD's FSR upscaling from a very low resolution, whether that's 1080p or even 900p or whatever the case is, to hit that 60 FPS. It is upscaling from a low resolution, and it looks on the base PS5, the performance mode is like muddy, right? It's like one of those things where it's like, okay, this is definitely not native, right?
Yeah.
So the PSSR version, obviously the Pro has more power, so like it looks more, there's more fidelity to it, but the performance mode is just like a night and day difference because the PSSR upscaling works so much better than the previous, from a lower resolution than the previous options, that it is almost like a selling point for the new console.
Wow. Okay.
On top of like the increased ray tracing, the increased GPU performance, because the CPU hasn't changed, right? And the CPU is important when it comes to hitting high frame rates. So like it's all like, sunshine and roses for the PS5 Pro now because it's selling out, like pre-orders, like as expected, right?
Yeah.
Because people love buying new tech, right?
For sure.
This is like a new iPhone. This was always going to sell really well. But I posted something where people need to slightly temper their expectations because Remedy announced that yes, ray tracing is coming to Alan Wake 2, to the quality mode, which is 30 FPS on the PS5 Pro. But the PS5 Pro is not a high-end PC, like, and Sony aren't selling it that way. But there are like there's a lot of community segments saying, oh, this Alan Wake is going to look like the PC version now. No. It's not going to look like that because the PC version is running full path tracing where you need a 4080 at a minimum to hit 4K.
Those people have never played on a 4090 or a 4080 or
understand what this ray tracing is. And they don't have the ray reconstruction, which actually makes the ray tracing look better.
Yeah.
So like it is not that, right? So, but it's going to be interesting to see what Remedy can do with like 30 FPS on a PS5 Pro because that will show you how far they can push it.
Yeah,
right?
that is an interesting.
Because if they're adding ray tracing, like how much of the ray tracing can they add? What's the quality of the ray tracing going to be? Like, is it going to be the PC medium version, or is it going to be PC high version? Is it going to be PC full path tracing ultra version? Obviously not. But like, at what are they going to do? Because we've already seen now, like the PS5 Pro can push better ray tracing, better frame rates, but it's not a it's not a magic machine, right?
Yeah.
Like if Alan Wake 2 is going to add ray tracing and it's going to still hit 30 FPS and not at native 4K either, it's going to use PSSR to upscale to get that, which is obviously what you would do. And PSSR by all accounts is great, but that could mean the same thing for GTA 6, right? It just means that they could push their fidelity mode even higher, but they're maintaining 30 FPS, right? Like or 60 FPS. Like it already shows you that like it's just like the existing consoles, right? Like more games will be 60 now because of the additional power, but it's not a guarantee.
Yeah, with a few that are 120 as well.
Yeah. So Resident Evil 4 is going to be pushing 120 in its performance mode, which is great because that game is so well optimized on PC.
Is that the first?
It would be one of the first.
It has to be one of the first that is taking one of the first games that's taking full advantage of the maximum performance cap for the PlayStation.
There are games that have done it, but they've kind of been just like those, like that.
This is a AAA though. This is a big title.
That's right. Like the side scrolling, there was like Ori, the Ori game on Xbox Series X runs at 120. There's like but they're not like super demanding games.
And they're not graphically impressive either. By
it'll be interesting.
Any comparison.
It'll be interesting to see. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see like what, like, if it's just the existing performance mode now running at 120, that actually is super impressive.
That is very
because
impressive.
Doubling that performance is not easy.
Yeah. Yeah, that is Resident Evil Village. This is what, in a chat with Sony regarding the upcoming PS5 Pro console, Capcom teased the following. For Resident Evil Village, we added 120 FPS gameplay to provide the best possible user experience on the PS5 Pro. This is thanks to the major performance boost, the unique and memorable cast of characters looks even more realistic, adding greatly to the scare factor, and the action scenes we have more punch than ever before. That's very cool to see. I think I was talking about it last week. It's back in the day, in the golden era of consoles, developers would take full advantage of the hardware capabilities within their machines, and it's great to see a developer and Capcom have been knocking it out of the park with their releases recently, especially since the remakes and the new Resident Evil as well. I think everything they've done.
I predict like the next Monster Hunter, which has been shown at TGS, they've just confirmed coming to PC as well on day one, first time for that franchise. Like Monster Hunter is way bigger than people realize,
it's
right?
Niche-y,
it was like a
but
Nintendo.
It's huge.
It was like just Nintendo, right? And my brother was playing, and I'm like, "What's this Monster Hunter?" And then they released that. Like it was like very anime based. It was like looked like a very Japanese sort of game.
Yeah,
Japanese developed game, like the art style and everything like that. And then they did that Monster Hunter game that was more like fantasy, more like that sort of like Lord of the Rings style art style. And they released that on like PlayStation, and the Xbox consoles sold insanely. They released on PC, and it's still one of the biggest PC games like that Capcom's ever done. And this next Monster Hunter game, which is the sequel to that, like
I think it's gonna be
4 or 5 years down the track, it's gonna be absolutely massive.
Wilds is what it's called.
Yeah, the Wilds. Yeah, it's gonna be huge.
I think it's gonna be massive, and
the next Elden Ring type of thing, where it's just everybody's gonna be talking about
100%. And I think it's going to be because, like I said earlier, it's a niche game, but it's very popular within its niche. And I think you're definitely right in saying it's definitely one of the most biggest PC games at the moment, but I really do think with the release of Wilds, it could be enough to push it into like the mainstream. Like,
I think so, yeah.
Up with the Fortnites, the PUBGs. Like, I think we're going to see it in the
like Black Myth Wukong. Everybody's going to be talking.
Yeah, it's going to be a big thing. It. And I looked at the did just a touch of research into it because I was interested because I've never played a Monster Hunter game. They kept all of the same like icons and just little stuff from like in the UI from the previous game.
Yeah.
So players that apparently a major problem with the previous Monster Hunter game is the barrier of entry is quite high. So it's not very friendly in the sense of you can't just pick it up and play it. You got to actually understand what the icons
onboarding
are, the traps, the different weapons, how they interact with like the combat triangle. But once you get your head around all of that, it then becomes really quite an enjoyable experience. And with Wilds, and this is in the Tokyo Game Show trailer, they showed off the UI and the inventory, and much of it is apparently very the same. And I like that. I think that's great. I think that helps the players that have gone over, that is making the jump from the previous game to the new game, just a lot easier. And it's also... it means that those players that are playing that game can help their friends. You don't need not everyone needs to relearn the game. And I like that for a sequel. I think that's a great decision by Capcom.
Oh, definitely. The final one I would touch on is that EA, obviously, like this is a big blog post with all these developers. They talked about Dragon Age the Valguard, which is out at the end of October.
That looks
right?
cool.
So this is going to launch kind of like around when the PS5 Pro launches. And we've seen like the high-end PC trailers for it. Actually looks really good. People that have played the PC version said the visuals are stunning. So that's going to have a fidelity and performance mode, and the PS5 Pro version is going to push that fidelity version super high. But even the performance mode is going to have ray traced ambient occlusion, which is not a super noticeable version of ray tracing. Ambient occlusion is that thing where, let's say you in a room and you see a table, right? And then where the table meets the floor, like, you know, there's like a shadow for like the legs or the edges of the table are like darkened and stuff like that. Ray traced version of that looks real. The non-ray traced version, like it's kind of like you might see the underside of the table fully lit somehow because it's not being occluded by the shadows and stuff like that. So it's a very subtle one, but if you saw it side by side, like, you know, like spot the difference between these two pictures, you'll be able to spot it. But it's not super showy, but the fact that they're bringing that to the performance mode for Dragon Age is impressive.
That's good.
But that also means that they're probably bringing all the other stuff to the fidelity mode that we're going to see in the PC version, like the ray trace reflections and all that sort of stuff. So that'll be like one of the first major AAA games on the PS5 Pro. It's going to be EA's and BioWare's Dragon Age. And that'll be interesting to see how that looks and runs.
Is exciting. Well, let's round this episode off with talking about the current state of the PC industry as a whole. And this is kind of like an extension. What was that, sorry?
Yeah, for CPUs. And this is like CPUs and GPUs and
CPUs,
stuff like that.
GPUs. Pretty much if you're a hardware fan and, you know, you're looking to upgrade. I penned up quite an extensive piece talking about this because I think it is quite a problem for consumers right now. The state of the market is not very favorable for the consumer right now. And this is an extension of what we were talking about with NVIDIA's dominance in the GPU market in particular, and AMD pulling out of the high end. So right now, NVIDIA currently, as of Q2 2024, has 88% of AIB market share for GPUs. And just for comparison's sake, AMD holds 12% and Intel holds, now you go ahead and say it.
0%. So like it's like 0.2%.
Zero, bro.
It is so low
that it's zero.
That it's a non-entity.
Yes.
That ARC hasn't made a dent.
Yes.
It hasn't even
scratch it.
Hasn't even taken like a single digit. Like it hasn't taken like 3 or 4%
Nothing
of this market. This is like a multi-billion-dollar market, right?
Yeah.
And they obviously, Intel still is the market leader when it comes to CPUs, right? Like even though they're facing one controversy after the other and all sorts of financial problems, et cetera, which we'll probably get into next episode, with takeovers and things like that, because that's a whole massive...
Oh, yeah, we could definitely talk on that.
Story. But like they've got 0%. And the thing is that 88% is ridiculously... That's so 88%... Much. Like 88%, like even... in any market, that just means there is no
Monopoly.
competition.
Yeah,
right?
monopoly.
That is a monopoly, whether by just that's the way things
Yeah,
have gone.
if I
or
owned 88%
whether
of
that's
the
business
housing
practices.
slots on the monopoly board,
Yeah,
you're gonna be like, this game's over.
yeah,
This
yeah. Like how do you?
you're not even gonna
how
play
do
the
you
game
turn that
anymore.
around? Yeah, the only way it's going to, like when we see this next generation, the initial few months pan out, the reception, not just performance, because like even like look at AMD's current RDNA 3 GPUs, right? There are options there. They will say like, yeah, like if you got that GPU, you can have a great time. You can play games super fast frame rate. You've got access to stable drivers. It's the game's gonna look good. They're gonna run great. So there's no like, oh, that's terrible. So they don't make terrible products, but like they're not priced that competitively. There's not that many options. The mind share is completely captured by RTX, and Nvidia did a great job with not selling, with shifting the focus away from just pure performance when they were selling their GPUs now. Like they sell you DLSS, they sell you ray tracing, they sell you they sell you the features,
It's
right?
not just horsepower.
And that made like whether or not that means anything to you is irrelevant, because that's what's actually captured the mind share.
Absolutely,
right? And they've increased market share based on this
and the value of those features. It's like at the start they weren't that fantastic, but now you'd be silly to not turn on DLSS 3 if you're running a game at 4K.
And they were right.
Yes,
right. They were right.
They
were first 6 years ago,
and they were right.
PSSR, AI-based upscaling for PlayStation, a game changer. It's going to be in the PS6. AMD have already confirmed the next version of their FSR is AI-based and for handhelds, the one market that they have complete control over, right? Because they're the only ones that actually decided to make these really great integrated graphics chips, with the Steam Deck,
the
and
Strix Points,
ROG Ally, etc., etc. So they know AI is required. And Nvidia's been doing it for 6 years, but then even just a console gamer that is a like a Nintendo fanboy, right? Like we all know Nintendo fans that
I'm a Nintendo
pretty much
fan.
Like they played all the consoles, they have the Switch, but they may dabble in some PC gaming, but they don't really care. They follow Nintendo news. They want to know when Zelda, if there's a Nintendo Direct, they're watching it, right? Within either when it happens or within a day. But they all know about DLSS. They heard the rumblings that the Switch 2 is going to have DLSS, and they go, oh, so that's going to mean it's going to be like, it's going to do all that cool AI stuff that's happening in the PC space. They may not even know what it does or what it is, right? But they know about it. And that just shows you that this 88% market share and mind share, really.
That's
because
a good
when you
way
got
to put
that,
it.
is like you've got the mind share.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a bigger mountain to climb than market share. Because if we're looking at just pure like commercial market share, where it's like you release a product where it's, let's say it's just something at the supermarket, like toilet paper. It is cheaper and it's the same sort of thingo, and you buy it, right? Because there's no real it's not a smartphone, it's not a TV, it's not a game console, it's not, just like in the same way the PlayStation has the mind share, like that's a bigger mountain to climb for Xbox than just having something that's more powerful and cheaper. Yeah. Like that's just not going to cut it.
I agree.
Like how does AMD, the bigger hurdle for AMD is not to have a compelling product that's way more affordable. That's the easy part. Even though that's not technically not easy, but that's the easy part. The hard part is trying to take some of this mindshare away from the PC gaming community that is just all in, not all in, but all they know is NVIDIA. Everybody's got NVIDIA. Everybody's got the RTX. I want DLSS. Every game's got DLSS. I want to see what ray tracing's like. I want to play Counter-Strike at 300 plus FPS on this GPU that everybody else is using with reflex and lower latency, and I want my reflex monitor. I want my G-Sync. Yeah. It's completely taken over, right? Yeah. And how do you penetrate that? I mean, they're trying and they've got their versions of these technologies, but that's the
I know how you do it.
To climb. How?
You release a product that a couple of years down the line turns out to be really bad and starts overdrawing power and Then you got instability problems with it. Does this remind
and then
you
you
of
get
that
people
tragedy?
get banned from playing games, and then you have to like.
Oh,
just
and then you blame motherboard
emergency drivers.
manufacturers. Then you blame motherboard
and then you do
manufacturers
that.
because it's their power profiles that are actually stuffing up your product. Does this remind you of anything? That tragedy with Intel? That's an inside Norm McDonald joke that Costa and I run constantly at any given opportunity for me to say, does that remind you of that tragedy? I will say it. But what we are talking about is obviously the power related problems with the 13th and 14th generation CPUs. Just a quick I suppose overview of it. During idle times or low activity times with these CPUs, it was discovered that they were drawing excess wattage more than what they were spec'd for, and that related to hardware problems and actual physical damage to the CPUs. Now that is an irreversible brand hit on Intel's front, and the company is suffering tragically right now. It's the worst state I've ever seen Intel in, given what was their position in the CPU market as just the absolute leader. They let go 15% of their workforce, which is the equivalent of 15,000 employees. They sold all of their ARM shares for about $146 million. They're in a complete state of restructuring right now.
They're the Ubisoft of the tech industry.
Yeah. I mean, they're dealing with what Ubisoft's dealing with. And this speaks again to the current state of the PC industry. For the longest time, Intel's CPUs were, the new generation comes out, they're automatically the best, they're automatically the fastest, but now that trust has been broken with consumers. I don't think anyone is going to be running out and grabbing Arrow Lake with the absolute utmost confidence that these CPUs aren't going to, in a few years,
that's right,
have a few problems.
Cautious.
There's going to be, I don't think we've felt the full blow from the 13th and 14th gen CPU issues. I think we'll see when Arrow Lake comes out, the adoption rate compared to the previous generation. I think it's going to be dwindling. I think it's going to be the least adopted generation of CPUs from Intel in the last 10 years. And speaking of adoption rate, and again, this speaks to the wider problem of the PC industry, is AMD's Ryzen 9000 series is the least adopted CPU generation since Bulldozer. So look, that adoption rate has entirely to do with the lack of gaming performance that was expected with this generational leap here. Like we said earlier, gamers do not care about efficiency, and these CPUs were efficiency based. They gave pretty much the same performance as the previous generations, but just using way less power, and I'm pretty sure their thermals were better as well. This stuff impresses people like me and you,
and
you, where
but it's, I get it.
We're
it's not,
these are awesome chips, but if you're just looking for frames, then this just wasn't it. Pardon me.
Like you would buy something that's cheaper, and
you get the 7800 X3D or something like that. That's what you'd be picking up. That still remains the leading CPU for gaming from AMD. So what does this all mean for the market as a whole? Well, we have Nvidia with an 88% market share and no direct competitor at its higher end product stack, so they can charge whatever they want for the 5090 because there is nothing up there competing. But as an extension of that, they can charge whatever they like for whatever product in their product stack, simply because the AMD has 12% of the market. So like you said, they have captured that mind share. So we're dealing with a bit of a monopoly there, and Nvidia as a result can stagger performance. They can charge whatever they like. So this isn't a healthy situation.
They don't have to, they can just say, like, whatever this was going to be, we can just cut the performance
100%.
by 10% as make a bit more money.
Yeah.
And then the next generation, we can have that extra 10% in our back pocket.
Yep, that's exactly right.
And do I begrudge them for doing that?
No.
Man, if you're at the top,
No, that's what I
you're
would
making
do.
these decisions. I don't begrudge them,
Yeah.
but I'm not happy.
Yeah, if I was
because it just
Jensen,
means
that's what I'd be thinking. I'd be like, this is better guaranteed revenue over X amount of period of time. It's just not
And then the
healthy for the
consumer
end
loses.
consumer, though. That's the thing.
That's right. That's right.
And then we've got, oh my God, pardon me. Hold on, give me a sec here.
Mhm.
Oh, pardon me. Then we've got the CPU market. So Intel has broken trust with consumers. So no one's necessarily running out to go get the new Arrow Lake CPUs. So that is poor. We don't.
Do you think?
Go ahead.
Like this is a question. Like, because you've seen all this and article like covered like this in really good detail. But do you think that the next Arrow Lake or the next AMD CPUs, like they're all trending towards like AI, right? So they're going to have AI hardware, AI performance, which is another thing that gamers do not care about in their CPUs. Do you think like that's just going to just fragment it? Like even more people are just going to be like, like make it even less of
What, dedicated
less appealing
AI
because
CPUs?
yeah, well, all these CPUs that would have potentially NPUs in them now. Like, that's going to increase the cost, or there's going to be like, oh, now we're Copilot. Now you can run this generative AI task on your CPU or on your desktop. Like, and if every CPU's got that, then if that's the focus now instead of just.
I don't know. I don't think I haven't seen a single AI piece of software that is enough for me to recommend someone run out and get an AI piece of hardware to
the
run
laptop space is now
there's
transformed, right? The laptop space, if you want to buy a new one, you're going to get the Ryzen 300 or
but
the
still
Lunar
there's no
Lake,
software on it for me to be like, oh, you need to go out and get this laptop. So there needs to be some kind of AI piece of software for me to go, yes, I think the CPUs will, because adopting the hardware is only going to increase the BOM of these products, like the building materials. So I don't want that. I don't want the stuff to get more expensive for a piece of software that doesn't exist right now. So I hope not. What I do know though is that we can't say that. That's under NDA. I was just about to just like open a can of worms. So the current state of the industry is we're dealing with a bit of a crisis in the CPU market. AMD's upcoming chips, given the performance of the 9000 series, people have wrote online that they're not necessarily super excited for the X3D versions of these chips if they do exist, because they come from the same 4nm process node. So we can't necessarily expect a super big jump from compared to the 9000 series, because it's coming from the same batch of processors. Like we're not going to get, if there is X3D chips rumored for next year's CES, if they do exist, they're not going to be like a 15 or even a 20%, 30% jump in performance, because simply they come from the same batch.
But like CPU performance, like I don't know like what people are expecting, but like the last few generations have all just been like 10%, 15%, 10%. Like it's not like, it's like, I don't know, like, but like for a gamer, like I don't put as much stock in CPU outside of like okay, the X3D, that's great, like I'll get that, it's better performant, but like I'm like, that's it, like I know that the GPU is the main thing and that's secondary.
For gaming, the main thing would be to making sure your system, at the very least for your CPU, if you're building a system, is to make sure that it's not bottlenecked. That's it. That's right. That's all.
Exactly.
It's like you can rock with any kind of model. It doesn't really matter that much in gaming. Obviously, you want to go through the X3D chips, and I think on the Intel side, they're the K versions, right? They're the unlocked ones. So just make sure your system isn't bottlenecked by your CPU. That's about it. And obviously, if you're running some productivity tasks, i.e. Photoshop, video editing, you want to go for the higher core count models. So yes, that is the landscape right now in the PC industry. We're dealing with a monopoly that can charge whatever they like. Intel is currently on fire, and we don't know whether we should buy their CPUs. And AMD's current generation is so disappointing that no one bought it, and which has only provided negative sentiment for an upcoming generation. If there is one, you know, rumored. So that's kind of where we're at right now. All of the links for all of the stories that we've talked about in this week's episode are below in a Google Docs link. There's heaps of reading in there. There's additional stories that we didn't necessarily get to. Go check out that Ant game that I'm very excited about. But we won't talk about that. We got to wrap this up. I have a flight to catch. So, yes, I'm heading over to your state.
Oh yeah, for
Interstellar.
IMAX Interstellar.
Yes, tomorrow. And I didn't realize I was flying on Grand Final Day. We are recording this on the Grand Final Day for AFL. And go Lions. All right, guys. Thank you very much for listening, and we will be back next week. See ya.